The industrial town of Bury sits between Blackburn and Burnley to the north, Rochdale to the east, Bolton to the west, and Manchester just 8 miles to the south. And from 1859 it was connected to all of the above via a sprawling network of lines, including main lines running north to south and east to west, and 2 main stations in the town. And then, in a tale as old as time, 100 years of rail travel took just over 10 years to run down, close and destroy altogether. By 1980 there was next to nothing left of Bury's railway past, except for one station. From this outpost came a resurrection of spectacular proportions, and a heritage railway that isn't just a celebration and reconnection to Bury's past, but a line intrinsically linked to local communities and the town itself. Folks, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the wonderful East Lancashire Railway.
Hello people of the internet, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to another station, another mile. I'm at Bury Station today. Well, when I say Bury Station, I mean Bury tram stop. Though I'm in the right place, I'm not at the right station in Bury. This is another one of those Heritage Line quests. And if we're not at the right station in Bury, what station do we need to be at? Come with me, I'll show you what I mean.
10 minutes walk from the Bury tram stop is the station we're actually looking for, one that was once where trains along what is now the tram line from Manchester used to run to and directly through, Bury Bolton Street. Not only is this the main headquarters of the line and the location of the Bury Transport Museum, but Bury Bolton Street used to see services from all over pass through, including trains from Rochdale, Accrington, Backup and of course Manchester. Now, with that said, take a very deep breath and pay attention at the back, because this whiteboard segment's going to be a bit of a doozy. In the late 1840s, the network of lines through Bury took shape. A north-south route from Manchester up towards Accrington and Backup via Summerseat, Ramsbottom and Rawtenstall stations, and around the same time an east-west route was also underway from Rochdale in the east to Bolton, Wigan and eventually Liverpool in the west. The east-west line had its own dedicated station in Bury, named Bury Knowsley Street, but 2 curves of track meant trains could run between the 2 lines and Bury stations. Now throw in a branch to Holcombe Brook just north of Bury Bolton Street, as well as 3 different services and 2 lines to Manchester Victoria from Bury Bolton Street down south, and this was the complex maze of lines in and around the Greater Manchester and Lancashire area from the late 1800s till the early 1960s. Now, do you want to take a guess at how much of this would still be standing by the early 1970s? Almost none of it. The Holcombe Brook branch was already gone by 1952, and then the much maligned beaching cuts began, and they really hit hard. Initially, all 3 of Bury's direct services from Manchester were to be cut, and while one was saved, the other 2 slowly vanished. By 1967, the lines north of Stubbins Junction to Accrington, northeast of Rawtenstall to Backup, and south of Bury via Radcliffe North were all consigned to history. And soon after, in 1969, the route between Bury and Rawtenstall became single track, with almost all the station infrastructures along the route demolished entirely. The line and stations east via Bury Knowsley Street to Rochdale were gone by October 1970, and the last remaining northbound service from Bury to Rawtenstall finally fell in June 1972. All Bury Bolton Street had left was the southbound Manchester Victoria service, and when a new travel interchange in the town was built in 1980, on the line which would become part of the Manchester Metro link in 1991, the final bell seemed to be tolling for Bury Bolton Street. But behind the scenes, work had begun on preserving sections of these lines as far back as 1972, when the Bury Transport Museum first opened. And crucially, there was still track in place between Bury Bolton Street and Rawtenstall, as well as on the eastern section on the line from Rochdale, to allow freight trains to access a depot at Rawtenstall. So once this freight service ceased in December 1980, the East Lancashire Light Railway Company, as they were known at the time, were able to start negotiating to take over the old railway, with British Rail now having basically no use for it. And in July 1987, the East Lancashire Railway officially reopened for business between Bury and Ramsbottom. The line made it back to Rawtenstall in April 1991, and after a gargantuan amount of work, including building a brand new bridge over the Metrolink line and a new station altogether at Heywood, the extension back east was officially reopened to passengers in 2003. Future plans involve formally reconnecting with the national network at Castleton Station, but for now, this is the 12.5 miles of line that make up the East Lancashire Railway today. Now, if that all sounds like a lot to get your head around, don't worry. I fully admit that I was struggling to take everything myself on the first day. Well, that and getting distracted by a vast array of some of my favourite locomotives ever, putting on a show for the line's winter diesel gala. After some exploratory trips up and down the line, marvelling at the contrast between the urban bustle of Bury Bolton Street and the rural beauty northbound at places like Ramsbottom, I decamped to the pub on platform 2 at Bolton Street to try and process my first impressions on this bewitching line. So, I've successfully made it across town and I am now at the Bury rail station I wanted to be at all along, which is Bury Bolton Street, and more specifically I'm at the pub that's on platform 2, the trackside, enjoying a pint, as I tend to do at Heritage Railways. And that one's quite nice. Straight away, what I'm really enjoying is kind of a similar thing to, do you remember at the Great Central Railway? We discussed how busy and vibrant and full of life that entire line was. This is taking it to a whole nother level. Regularly, there's 3 platforms in active use. There was 4 at one point, including a bay platform 1 to that side. I can barely remember a point today so far where there's not been at least one train sitting in the station. This genuinely feels like a mainline station. It has that regularity of trains coming in and out. The train's sitting there, there'll be one more coming through and then another one will depart and then going on. It is quite an intense operation. There's a lot of locomotives running this weekend, a lot of different trains, and I think what helps is that this kind of uniquely is the headquarters of a Heritage Line in the middle of the Heritage Line itself. This is not at one end, like for example with Loughborough, it was at one end of the Great Central Railway for now. This is right in the middle of the current East Lancashire Railway route. It being in the middle means you have trains coming and going from both directions. It's not just one at a time and then going back out again, if that makes sense. So kind of like at the Great Central Railway, I'm taking this first day for the most part to just explore, to check things out. There's a whole host of locomotives here this weekend that are some of my absolute favourites of all time. For example, do you remember the warship that was running at the Spa Valley Railway when we did that episode in Series 1? That is one of 2 preserved D800 class warship locomotives in existence. The other one is here and running this weekend, D832 Onslaught. Very excited about that. There's a Class 50 running this weekend. I may have mentioned this in previous episodes that the Class 50 is my favourite locomotive of all time. Do you remember how excited Chris was to ride behind the GWR Hall steam locomotive at the Great Central Railway? That's kind of me with Class 50s. Yeah, big fan of those. There's also Class 47s, there's 33s, there's just a huge multitude of locomotives, and this is after 2 had to pull out in the build-up. There's a lot to get me head around this weekend. Let's have an explore for ourselves, shall we? Well, we kicked off by exploring the eastern end of the line, the section that used to include Bury Knowsley Street station. Not that you'd know, as there's literally nothing left of the old station. Not only that, but the new route of the Metrolink line cut right through the old track bed, meaning an entirely new bridge had to be built over it to clear it. Between all of that, another abandoned station at Broadfield, and having to build an entirely new station at Heywood after the existing one was wiped off the map in the 70s. And this seemingly innocuous section of line and small little terminus station at Heywood represents something much larger than itself. Something bordering on an absolute miracle. And the plans aren't over yet.
Oh hi, didn't see you there. Welcome to the eastern end of the East Lancashire Railway here at Heywood. Now there's a few interesting things to note. Firstly, this isn't the original Heywood station. There has been a Heywood station here, but that one was closed in 1970 and was situated a bit further back up the line that way. This is a new build that was only opened in 2003, and for now, it's the eastern terminus of the East Lancashire Railway. Note how I said for now. The ultimate aim has always been to continue further, a little bit further east, to link up with the current network rail station at Castleton. Originally, the plan was to run Network Rail services up here into Heywood Station. That kind of fell through, didn't work unfortunately. The plan now is to extend the current line towards Hopwood and into the Castleton station by building an extra bay platform there, kind of like what's been done at the Bluebell Railway at East Grinstead and the Midhants Railway and places like that. So the little bit of track that extends beyond the level crossing at the eastern end of Heywood Station could potentially be carrying a lot more trains through here and out the other side in the future. It feels like so much work has been put into bringing the East Lancashire Railway back this far, but this is only part of a wider project. And I really hope in later episodes of this series, I get to come back here and tell you that their successful expansion has been completed further eastbound, and this is now a through station once more. Here's hoping. For now, this is the eastern end, so I'm gonna have a bit of an explore and then get the train back to Bury. Hello folks, it's your boy. It's 8 AM on a Saturday morning. I'm in my hotel and I'm about to head back to the East Lancashire Railway. Now yesterday we checked out as far as the line goes south and eastward towards Heywood. Today is all about the main section and the section that has been running the longest on the East Lancashire Railway north towards Ramsbottom and Rawtenstall. First, I do need some tea though. Now I'm going to sort that out. So guys, good news. I've made it in time for the first departure of the day from Bury Bolton Street. Bad news is, didn't get a chance to pick up a cup of tea before I left my hotel. But that's okay, because the cafe on platform 3 and 4 came through clutch for me. Got my tea, got the first departure from Bury Bolton Street. Summerseat is that way, and we're going to Class 24 diesel locomotive by the name of Phil Southern on the end, ready to be our steed for this first journey of the day. Onwards, Phil.
Now, just out of Bolton Street heading northbound are two notable things. Firstly, the location of where the branch to Holcombe Brook used to split off, now mostly gone, although some parts of the old route are now a cycling path. And secondly, the Castlecroft Goods Warehouse, which has been since 1973 the location of the Bury Transport Museum. In the early days, before any serious permission was granted to a heritage railway operation, the East Lancashire Railway volunteers ran the museum as a way to raise funds for the heritage line. Guess that ended up paying off long term, huh? Oh, and one more thing. In this section of line sits the newest station on the entire railway, Burrs Country Park, opened in October 2016 to serve the nearby leisure park of the same name. We instead headed straight to the first original station northbound at Summerseat, a station that sums up a lot of what the East Lancashire Railway is about.
It's a bit nippy this morning, folks. Anyway, most importantly, we're at our first stop on the line northbound, which is at Summerseat. Now, on first glance, it may look just like your kind of standard single platform heritage railway station, but in many ways, this is kind of a little time capsule of how a lot of the stations on this line ended up and have ended up being revived by the East Lancashire Railway. There's a very good reason there's no buildings on this station. It's because there was once quite a few of them, and then they all got demolished in 1971. The track was once double track. In fact, the whole line used to be double track. You can very clearly see the space where there used to be another track. That got ripped up in 1970. And in fact, you can actually see the other platform. Still extant, bit overgrown, bit sort of shabby, but it's still there. I do find it curious if a lot of the track bed for the other line is still in place and there's still room to do it. Could we see a double track East Lancashire Railway, kind of like what the Great Central Railway have done, where they've redoubled a lot of their line? But there is one story I really want to tell you about. It's probably my favourite story about Summerseat. In January 1967, when this line was first earmarked for closure and services were being run down between Bury and Rawtenstall, there was a protest right here at this station. Not just a few sort of grumpy commuters. We're talking hundreds of people on this very platform that I'm stood on here, so angry about services being reduced and the line potentially being shut, that the local police were here to make sure that it didn't all kick off. As far as I could tell, it all remained relatively peaceful. I'm assuming the most kind of aggro that there was just some tutting and some sort of, what the bloody hell do you think you're doing? And then everyone went inside to grumble some more and have a pint. I just love the fact that this, of all places, this platform I'm stood on right now, was the scene of a massive protest about lack of services on the railways back in the 1960s. Now remember that next time you're grumbling about your train to work being late or you're not happy with the service of your local train operating company. With that done, it's time to wait for our next train. Fortunately, it should only be a matter of minutes away. And so we now arrive at Ramsbottom station, which for a while was actually the northern terminus of the East Lancashire Railway. When it first reopened in preservation, this was as far north as they originally got. They only reinstated the link as far north as Rawtenstall in 1991. And do you remember what I said back at Summerseat about how so much of these stations have lost a lot of their original features and so much had to be built anew by the East Lancs Railway? Well, Ramsbottom kind of typifies almost all of that. There's a very nice station building over there, a little shelter over here, two big platforms. It looks original. If you told someone, and indeed when I first arrived here, I thought this was just some of the original buildings that they've restored. Do you want to know roughly what was left by the time this line was shut and most of the stuff was demolished and swept away in the early 70s? That platform over there, that one track, that was about it. The original station buildings on both sides, all gone. The original platform on this side, gone as well, which means that the platform I'm standing on right now had to be built anew, rebuilt by the East Lancashire Railway when they reopened this place. It had to be added back in, and in fact there is a plaque on the entrance, on the wall near the entrance of the current station building, which announces its opening in 1989. And what I think is really impressive is not only have they managed to build back so much of what was swept away, but more impressively, it feels like a period station. It feels like you're in the 1950s. 1950 style buildings, signs, everything else. You could easily mistake this for a station that has been here for, decades and decades, and at one point was shut, but then reopened and just given a sort of lick of paint, rather than something that was borderline swept away into nothing and then revived. For now, I have had a cup of tea this morning, but I haven't had something to eat yet. And I have just noticed that there is a cafe literally across the road, which I think should be open by about now. So I'm gonna go get something to eat.
The cafe was indeed open, and I can confirm their breakfast was lush. And I could watch trains go by out the window. Now that's something you don't get at most cafes, is it? Back on the train, we continued northbound, passing through the side of the old Stubbins station and junction, where the line to Accrington once ran. The platforms remain extant and Stubbins, but so far work hasn't commenced on reopening it. Yet. The next stop on the line is instead up at Irwell Vale.
Folks, allow me to introduce you to potentially the most picturesque and pretty station on the entirety of the East Lancashire Railway, here at Irwell Vale, set in the beautiful rolling hills of Lancashire. There's farmland and fields all around. It's a lovely sort of quaint village countryside station that dates all the way back to 1991. Look, hang on a sec, let me just check my notes. Irwell Vale opened 19... Yeah, that is correct. See, do you remember what I was saying back at Ramsbottom about how the East Lancashire Railway have done such a great job of rebuilding and building anew to make the line and the infrastructure on it feel so original and true to their period setting? Well, this takes it one step further here at Irwell Vale, because there never was a station at Irwell Vale to begin with. There was originally a station just north of here at Heywood Bridge and Edenfield, which does then beg the question, why didn't the East Lancashire Railway just reopen that one? It's actually much better placed here than the station up at Heywood Bridge and Edenfield. So that was the rationale for building a brand new station here rather than one up there, or restoring the one that was up there. And to be honest, having seen the amount of work they put into restoring other stations on the line, I can honestly see them just looking at the remains of Heywood Bridge and Edenfield and just going, do you know what? We're basically building brand new stations altogether. Why don't we just build a brand new station slightly better located for the local residents? And that's kind of been an interesting thing about the East Lancashire Railway. It really feels part of the local community, this does. At least 3 people, maybe more, on this trip have started chatting to me based on the fact they've noticed the badges on my coat. And as soon as I've mentioned that I'm here for the East Lancashire Railway, their faces have lit up. I've genuinely not really come across a heritage railway that has quite such a tight connection to the locals and to the local community. It is a part of the landscape here. He's getting a bit nippy though, so I might just stay in the warm until my train arrives for Rawtenstall.
We passed through the old site of Heywood Bridge and Edenfield station not long after that, before arriving at Journey's End, the northern terminus at Rawtenstall station.
Now, not to sound like I'm grumbling or anything, but that little layover at Irwell Vale turned into nearly 2 hours of waiting. There was a loco failure back at Bury. To put it bluntly, I'm now freezing my proverbials off. Thankfully, there is another pub at Rawtenstall station. And in the meantime, let us now discuss Rawtenstall station itself, the northern terminus of the East Lancashire Railway. Although, for the longest time back in its operational days, it did go further north. You wouldn't guess it though, because this is another one of those having to start pretty much from scratch jobs. The original buildings and most of the platform that I am stood on right now were demolished in the late 60s, and the station itself was formally closed in 1972. However, the line itself survived a little bit longer. You see, there was a coal depot in the vicinity that still required freight traffic. So up until 1980, the line remained open for that purpose alone. Once the depot was gone, the line was finally shut in 1982. However, that did mean it had survived long enough for it to fall into preservation. So once the East Lancashire Railway got their hands on it, they were able to resurrect a little bit easier. And in 1991, they reopened up to Rawtenstall, which is about as far north as they can go for now. There's a bit too much in the way now to expand north, including the new station building at Rawtenstall, which is kind of an admission that they know this is about as far north as they're going to be able to get, because they've literally built the station on top of what would have been the old track bed. But again, I keep saying it, I love what they've done with the place. I love the fact that they've built so much anew, and yet it all still feels original. It feels of its time. You could absolutely come here and just believe, yeah, this is how the station always was. That building was always there. Yeah, it's one of those weird things. It's kind of the heritage line paradox. On the one hand, it's kind of sad that it's a heritage line in the first place because of how much that has been lost in the process. But on the other, how incredible is it that people, pretty much volunteers, have done all of this, have rebuilt, have refreshed, have saved, have restored, have done so much work on the track, the stock, the stations, the infrastructure and everything else to enable this to run now as a currently functioning railway. With that all being said, I'm going to go inside to warm up a bit now and finish this.
Now, I say this with no hyperbole. The East Lancashire Railway is unlike any other heritage railway I've ever visited. Not just for the hustle and bustle at stations like Bury Bolton Street, nor the range of locomotives in action, and not even for the mind-blowing amount of work that has gone into raising this line from the dead, rebuilding and in many cases building anew from scratch to restore what was long lost. Instead, it's the fact that this little line almost feels like part of the fabric of the local community. This line isn't just a museum with moving exhibits, but a living, breathing entity that is as part of the contemporary landscape as it ever was back in its operational days. And above all else, it's a line that means something to so many people regardless of generation. It's friendly, it's warm, it's inviting, and it's rightfully held very dear to the hearts of many. And after this weekend, it really wasn't hard for me to see why.